I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Paul Block. He was the producer of the Alan Thicke Show back in the early 80s in Vancouver. We're talking about the sad passing of Alan Thicke, a very young 69.
I mean, damn, he was playing hockey when he died.
Apparently, after the age of 45, if you're playing hockey, you're putting your life in your hands.
Alan was devoted to his hockey. He loved his hockey. Wherever he went, he played his hockey. And I was an American, and I made fun of him because of that. I wish he had quit a day earlier.
Well, I know somebody said, you go out doing something that you like. I don't know. I don't want to die doing anything.
I want to die in my sleep.
Exactly. And one of the sad things, too, is that Alan on the gurney apparently was waving to people saying, "I'm okay, everybody. Don't worry."
I understand that. I read someplace that he asked his son Carter to take his picture while he was smiling on his way into the truck, into the ambulance.
Exactly. Now, just talking about Alan, was that the kind of guy he always was? If things were going bad or adverse or the show wasn't going quite right, he would still be cheerful?
Well, I mean, no, neither would I be, neither would the network be if things were not going right. But let me say, arguably, the show went right from the minute we went on the air till the minute Alan left. We never, ever had show going wrong problems. I mean, we had daily production problems. You always have them. And Alan jumped in and worked his tail off along with everybody else to fix those problems. Alan was the hardest working TV guy that I ever met. And I did 8,000 hours of television all in. I worked with a lot of people, and Alan was the hardest working one I ever worked with. Unfortunately, several of my host people have now passed, but they didn't do nothing compared to what Alan did. I mean, I don't know, Tom, did you read the piece that I wrote on Facebook?
Yes, I did. It was very touching.
Alan would work. I mean, there he is. We're counting down 10, 9, 8, getting ready to start the tape rolling, and Alan is on the floor with cue cards and markers making the last-minute changes to try to make things just a little bit better. He worked. He and Todd would be up until 4 in the morning writing their bits and that kind of stuff. Now, we had segment producers that would write the bits and pieces and interviews for all the other people. But Alan had a lot of stuff he was responsible for doing by himself. We had what we called desk spots. He'd come out, he'd say hello, and he'd do something by himself. And he and Todd and writers, not many, I think we had 2 writers, were responsible for writing all of those bits. And they worked. They worked. It wasn't easy, man. It didn't just flow. Alan and Todd went until 4 in the morning. And then Alan worked. We taped, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but we taped from Thursday through Sunday, 3 shows a day. So that's 12 shows over a 4-day period. And I would say that 90% of our guests were not living in Vancouver. They came from either Eastern Canada or the prairies or the United States. And we'd have them all at whatever hotel we had a deal with. So we'd have a bunch of people. And Alan, I couldn't do it. I'd leave Alan in the hotel bar with 15 or so guests, 20 guests, having a good time, talking about life, talking about showbiz stories, talking about that kind of stuff. But that was all part of the show. That was all part of Alan developing relationships and understanding of the people who were going to be on the show. Hardest working guy I ever met. I worked with Mike Douglas, Johnny Carson, 20 others. Those are the two biggest talk show hosts I worked with. And Johnny would show up at 2:30 in the afternoon. He'd get the notes that were written for him. He'd go over his monologue and the desk spots with the head writer, and he would do the show from 5:30 to 6:30, and he'd be gone. He'd get in his car and go away. Johnny worked 4 hours. Alan worked 16 hours. Mike Douglas didn't even do as much as Johnny. Mike would saunter into the studio when he wanted. The producer would tell him who was on the show, and we'd go into taping, and when he was done, he'd go home. Alan worked, and Alan deserved every bit of the success he got.
Was that, as you're saying, something extraordinary? You do get the feeling when somebody's relaxed in front of the camera that they're not really working. Alan seemed to me like he was just chatting with buddies, like you said, over a coffee or a beer.
That was one of his gifts. Everything that they talked about was planned. We had 5 or 6, I forget which, talent coordinators, segment producers, and when someone was on the show, that what they would do on the show was written by those producers. Now they were good enough to understand who they were writing for, and that was Alan. So they tried really hard to write in his voice and approach the things that he liked. And Alan always had the opportunity to go his own way. And I don't know, 25-30% of the time he did. He would find something in an interview that took him his own way, and he would dump the notes and stay with that. And at that point, it became chatting over coffee. But his gift was being able to internalize all of the work and put it out like a guy having a good time with somebody that he's chatting with.
Any favorite stories about interactions between Alan and his guests?
Not really. Those shows were so, my favorite stories I'm not going to talk about because I don't want to hurt anybody. Other than that, my favorite story, though, Leslie Nielsen had a fart machine that he carried with him wherever he went, a little rubber whoopee thing that he held in his hand. And he was doing our show, and Rip Taylor was sitting on the couch, and Rip Taylor didn't know he had a fart machine. And every time he would do his fart machine, Rip Taylor would freak out. But between Alan, I loved it when Jim Carrey came out and did an incredible Alan Thicke impression, sitting in the chair talking to Alan. I loved the work between Alan and his brother. We developed a bit for Todd, where Alan would quiz Todd about stuff while Todd was on the chair. But I don't remember any. The ones that stand out in my head, I don't want to talk about. They're the ones that made me go, "Oh my God!" But Alan was what you saw. He was good. He was hardworking, and like that, I enjoyed very much working with Alan Hamill. But when he left, it became the Alan Thicke Show, and it became the Alan Thicke Show in every sense. It changed, and it was a totally different kind of host with a totally different kind of talent, with a whole lot of different talents. You know, Alan was a writer. Alan was a singer. Alan was a interviewer. Alan was a producer. So he understood the needs of production. I wish I could remember and tell you interactions with the hosts. I remember once, again, Leslie Nielsen. No, it wasn't Leslie Nielsen. John Candy and somebody else. I forget who the other one was. A big star. Maybe somebody else from Second City. And we had a lady on the show who talked about colors, the kind of colors you should wear. This wasn't an interaction with Alan. So anyway, she did Candy, and she said to him, "Come to my studio tonight, my house, and I'll give you a complete list and reading and pictures and whatever." And might have been Fred Willard, I don't know. Anyway, actually it was a movie star. John Candy and a movie star, I forget who, someone on the order of a Burt Reynolds, went to this woman's home, but he had the wrong address. And there was John and, say, Burt Reynolds or whoever it was, knocking on the door of some family in Kitsilano who had no relationship at all to what was going on because it was a wrong address. And they went to the door, and there was standing John Candy and Burt Reynolds saying, "Hello." I loved that story, and and they invited him in for tea, and they sat and had tea. No, you know, Alan was game to try anything. He did dangerous stuff. He invented stuff. He did weird stuff with Kenny Rogers, making believe he was stalking Kenny Rogers at his house. You know, a lot of it blazed by me. 3 shows a day, 4 days a week, half-hour turnaround between shows. A lot of it just blazed by me. I sat and watched. I tried to keep the show out of trouble. I tried to keep Alan out of trouble. I tried to keep the guests out of trouble. I tried to keep the timing down. I tried to make sure we got our commercials in and didn't say nasty things about the sponsors. I don't remember his interaction with specific guests.
We'll have more with Paul Block right after the break.
Gem International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the 4th largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. Gem International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Paul Block, the producer of the Alan Thicke Show in Vancouver back in the 80s. Again, we're talking about Alan Thicke, who sadly passed away a few days ago after playing hockey. I guess it's a Canadian way to go, even if you're in Los Angeles.
Got it. I got a call from one of our segment producers, who's now a reasonably successful talent manager who lives in L.A., not in L.A., in Vancouver. She called me when she learned Alan died, and she was actually crying, and I said, how stupid, why the hell was he playing hockey at his age? And she said to me, "You know how much he loved playing hockey, and if Alan had to die, I can't think of a way he'd want to die more than playing hockey." And I guess she was right, but I don't know. I sort of look to protect my longevity a little more.
Yeah, I gave up playing hockey at 45 because I know what the statistics are for cardiac arrest and playing hockey after that age. It's not a pleasant number.
I don't like how cold it is. You know?
Well, if you're really playing, you're not cold. You sweat.
I'm sure.
Well, Paul, one thing about Alan Thicke maybe that people aren't aware of, though, was his musical talent. And if you looked at a lot of the TV shows like Jeopardy, who knew that he wrote the theme song for that?
I know he wrote Different Strokes, Growing Pains, a couple of other Norman Lear shows. I was unaware he wrote the theme for Jeopardy. He may have. I was just unaware of that.
Well, yes, you don't see a credit go up saying Alan Thicke wrote the theme song.
Alan was very close to David Foster, who is one of the top musical director-composers in the United States and Canada. Alan had a love of music. He loved to perform. Sometimes I think he wished he was Bruce Springsteen rather than Alan Thicke. And he loved to perform. He spent lots of time writing songs. He sang some of his original songs on the air. He wrote some with Todd, his brother, and they performed them on the air. Sometimes Todd would perform together with Alan. Todd wound up writing for many years, writing and producing America's Funniest Home Videos. And Todd developed his own separate, very successful career. Alan also dedicated himself, and I guess you guys know this, but probably more than anybody else that I know of, Alan dedicated himself to raising awareness and money for juvenile diabetes. I mean, he did as much for juvenile diabetes as Danny Thomas did for putting St. Jude's up. Alan was really committed to that, and probably one of the best things that he ever did in his life.
And of course, even up to this very moment, he was still actively involved in performing.
Well, yeah. Well, what was it? He a couple of years ago, he was on the road, being the singing, dancing lead of 42nd Street. Lately, he didn't do that much performing, though I'm sure he did. I haven't really been following his later career. He did a lot of spokesperson, TV pitchman stuff down here in the United States. I'm not sure, how much real performing he did, but I'm sure he did. I just wasn't paying attention. When I left, when Alan left to go to the States, we sort of parted professional ways. I spent a little bit of time with him in San Francisco, and we talked about maybe starting trying to sell some shows together. And I probably would have done it if I was in L.A., but I was really, really busy. I was producing I was executive producer of 3 daily shows being done in San Francisco, and I really didn't have any time to do anything else. But we did have that last meeting, and I enjoyed it. We had dinner with his wife and my wife, and he wanted to get a company going again, and I wish I had the time to have done that with him.
So often when a personality like Alan Thicke passes, we wonder why we didn't do more to recognize his talents and his personality while he was alive.
You're right, and we probably missed a little bit on Alan, though. Alan, he achieved a great measure of success and fame and wealth and prestige, and Alan had a lot of recognition. He had a lot of talent. For me personally, his talent was that he's possibly one of the 3 best talk show hosts I ever worked with or observed. I put him on par with Johnny Carson when we were doing our show. And I put him on par except he wasn't very political, I put him on par in terms of talent and ability with Jon Stewart. And I don't have any other TV hosts that I would put in that category. I worked with Carson for 6 years. I worked with Mike Douglas for 2 years, and I worked with 4 or 5 others, doing syndicated shows, doing cable shows. Nobody was better than Alan. I mean, he just had everything you had to do to do it right. He was attractive. He had a decent voice. He had a broad general knowledge. He was very curious. He performed when he had to perform. He understood comedy. He understood punchlines. He understood how to play the camera. If you watch the best talk show hosts, a lot of their best work is not when they're talking, but when they're looking, when they're playing the camera, when they're rolling their eyes, when they're doing that kind of stuff. Alan knew how to play the camera. And as I have written and said over and over again, his major talent as a talk show host was that he knew how to listen. I loved doing the show in Vancouver. Really got along with the people at BCTV and at CTV. Had an incredible amount of creative freedom. They trusted the hell out of me. And so when Alan asked me to come to Los Angeles to produce Thicke of the Night, I declined. I declined because I loved what I was doing. I thought I'd be walking into a buzzsaw on Thicke of the Night, and ultimately it might have been. The show was not very successful. But I don't blame Alan's performance for that failure of success. I don't want to get into the strategies and tactics and reasons that I think it didn't succeed like the Canadian show did, because I don't want to badmouth anybody. But if he did the Canadian show in the United States, my opinion is he would have been successful. If he fashioned his show, if the American show was fashioned after the Johnny Carson show, with a different perspective and a different host, I believe he would have been quite successful. I think he was as good as Johnny at his, in those days.
And of course, people who grew up in the 80s remember him as probably one of their favorite TV dads.
Yeah, Dr. Seaver. And my goodness, that was not part of my life other than as a friend of Alan's and as a spectator. I don't think I ever watched the show with all due respect. I may have watched the pilot just to see what Alan was doing. But I wasn't a hell of a sitcom guy. But as Dr. Seaver, he became America's father, everybody wished they had a father like him. He was an incredibly good role model on television. He had 2 kids, not 8 kids. And he did things right. And I got to tell you, Alan was a great father in real life. Somebody reminded me of a story when he had his 2 kids up for the weekend. The petting zoo at Vancouver in Stanley Park was closed, and he worked as hard as he could to get them to reopen it just for a day to let his kids in. He couldn't get them to do it. But Alan was a great father. He brought his kids to Vancouver every 4th or 5th weekend. Jesus, somebody's going by my house. I'm watching. He's holding on to the back of a truck, and he is on his feet on the ground. He's being towed. Anyway, Alan was a great father, and Dr. Seaver was a great father, and they were similarly great fathers. And it was a role model for America and Canada.
Did Alan, when he was doing shows like that, would he add some lines of his own, or would he just stick with what the writers had written?
No. Well, first of all, he was the head writer. He wrote most of his own stuff. So when he had written his stuff, if he added lines, he was just adding lines to what he already wrote. When it came to the guests on the show, he pretty much stuck with the interviews as written, but was totally free and often went his own way. Similar to Johnny Carson, by the way. Same thing. But Alan spent so much, I'm watching people slip and slide in their cars on the road. This guy I thought was going to hit another car, but didn't. Forgive me. Alan would, he'd go his own way. He thought, he was a thinker, and if somebody wrote an interview that he didn't like, you could see him making notes all day long. But it was, it was mostly a prepared show. It couldn't have happened 3 one-hour shows a day with half-hour breaks between them if it wasn't a totally prepared show. There's very little left to chance. The most chancy thing we ever had was if the airplane full of American or Toronto guests couldn't make it into Vancouver because of weather.
Wow, what a nightmare.
It was a real nightmare, except we protected. Like I said, we were prepared. What we did before every season, for 2 or 3 months before the season started, we would do on-location interviews, and we'd have them in the can so that when the plane didn't land, we could fill up the show with local guests like David Ingram, and supplement them with star pre-canned interviews like Kenny Rogers, that kind of stuff, or with Toronto people. We would go every year to the Toronto International Film Festival. We'd bring a camera crew, and we would line up 10 or 15 interviews so that we had movie stars and Canadians available for when the planes didn't come in.
Well, I had to admit, when I did my radio sports show, I did the same thing. You'd have interviews in the can just in case somebody couldn't make it to your studio at midnight.
Yeah, we had that as a serious issue in Vancouver. You know the weather there.
Right, and we're the only major airport in the world, I think, that doesn't have a blind landing and takeoff system.
Yeah, and what's the closest airport? Abbotsford?
Right, because it's a military airport.
Yeah, and so that's where they'd shunt the planes to when they couldn't make it into Vancouver.
Yeah, it's not quite the same experience. Paul, I know you're in a busy time there in Portland. You've just had a snow day, and I haven't been to Portland, but I imagine it's like Vancouver. When it snows, it's not very pleasant for the residents.
Come on down. You know, they make about 200 or 300 craft beers in Portland. Come on down, I'll buy you a beer.
And apparently people dress up weirdly and ride bicycles there. I've seen the ads on TV.
You got it. You're thinking about Portlandia.
Yes. Well, no, but Portland itself runs tourism ads in Vancouver, inviting us down.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
But they do dress up funny and ride bicycles. And drive a lot of Subarus.
Paul, thank you so much for being on the Goddard Report.
Jim, you're welcome. Anytime. Take care.
And fond memories of Alan.
I hope you got what you needed.
Certainly did, and a bit more.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
My guest has been Paul Block, producer of the Alan Thicke Show in Vancouver back in the early 80s. He was speaking to us from a very snowy and icy Portland, Oregon. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. You can find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show can be emailed to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. My executive producer is Tom Allen.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.